Questions orales, oral questions. The Honourable Opposition House Leader.
Vice-Admiral Mark Norman is a man of integrity who has served our country with distinction in the Royal Canadian Navy. Yeah. But the Liberals seem to have a personal vendetta against the Vice-Admiral and are going out of their way to block evidence and deny him a fair trial. Thankfully, there is a Liberal who has had enough of the Prime Minister's lack of integrity. The Liberal member for Orleans is going to testify on Norman's behalf. Will the Prime Minister stop this obstruction and release all of the relevant documents immediately?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I can report to the honourable member that the Department of Justice has cooperated and given all appropriate documents to the trial in question, and we continue to collaborate on an ongoing basis in order to make sure that all sides in the trial have the information that they are entitled to.
Honourable Opposition House Leader.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's completely false. The Liberals have refused to hand over documents to Mr. Norman's defence. Interestingly enough, though, when Jerry Butts needed access to emails and documents when he was trying to discredit the former Attorney General on the SNC-Lavalin affair, he had no problem at all getting those documents. It's clear yet again that there are one set of rules for friends of the Liberals and a different set for those who are in the Prime Minister's crosshairs. Why is the Prime Minister refusing to hand over critical documents and evidence to Mr. Norman's defence team?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, the case in question, the prosecution in question is being undertaken by the Public Prosecution Service of Canada. Counsel to the Attorney General is fulfilling all of its obligations in that instance before the court with respect to third-party records applications. Mr. Speaker, it's improper for me to say anything more than that, but we are
Order. The Honourable Opposition House Leader.
Well, between the SNC-Lavalin affair, breaking ethics laws, and foreign affairs disasters, the Prime Minister and his train wreck government have been in constant scandal mode. And now that the Norman trial is closing in, the Liberal member for Orleans is planning to testify against his own government. Talk about a dumpster fire. The Prime Minister does not want the truth coming out, and again, he's interfering in a criminal case. Will the Prime Minister admit that he is intentionally trying to delay Mark Norman's trial until after the election?
Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, once again, the trial is being handled by the the Public Prosecution Service of Canada. That agency runs independently of the government, makes its own decisions, and as a government, we are fulfilling all of our third-party obligations for records.
Order. The Honourable Member for Richmond-Athabasca. Mr. Speaker, after the Prime Minister was found guilty of breaching 4 sections of the Ethics and Conflict of Interest Act, after this Prime Minister and his close collaborators interfered in our justice system in the SNC-Lavalin matter, now we have the trial of Vice-Admiral Norman and yet another story of interference from the Prime Minister's office. This is a matter that directly affects Quebec workers at Davie Shipyard. Why did the Prime Minister interfere and block the contract? The Honourable Minister of Public Procurement. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I can assure you that we have full confidence in the Davie Shipyard workers. We have been involved in many contracts, including a $7 billion contract for frigates and a $70 million contract for icebreakers. And we fully have confidence in the Davie workers. The Honourable Member for Richmond-Athabasca. Mr. Speaker, after the resignation of Scott Bryson, the President of the Treasury Board, now it's this government's former Parliamentary Secretary for Foreign Affairs who is going to testify against his own Liberal government on Vice-Admiral Norman's behalf. This man with an impeccable track record, one of the most decorated men in the Canadian Navy. So I'm going to repeat my question. Why is the Prime Minister interfering and attempting to block this trial and block a contract to Davy? The Honourable Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, the trial in question is handled by the Public Prosecution Service of Canada that works independently from the Department of Justice and my office and government. The Public Prosecution Service and the Department of Justice are fulfilling all their third-party obligation for records.
Member for Burnaby South.
Mr. Speaker, 10 years ago, Canada joined G20 countries and promised to fight climate change by eliminating fossil fuel subsidies. Conservatives signed on, but predictably failed to act. The Prime Minister promised Canadians that he would do better. But instead, Liberals have dithered over semantics, delayed action, and continued to give billions in dollars in subsidies to fossil fuel corporations. When will Liberals finally stop handing out billions in fossil fuel subsidies and instead invest that money into helping Canadians build a new, clean economy?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Oceans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By taking action to fight climate change, we certainly will protect the health of our economy and create good jobs for the future. We stand by our commitment with our international partners to phase out inefficient, non-tax fossil fuel subsidies by 2025. We've done a bunch of the work in that regard. We continue to do that going forward. We've opened up a consultation with Canadians to move that forward, and we intend to meet our international obligations.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South. Mr. Speaker, climate change is the greatest crisis that we are facing. Yet the Liberals continue to give billions of dollars in subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. We can reduce our emissions and support our workers and communities. All that is needed is the courage to make the right choices. When will the government stand up for people and put an end to the oil industry subsidies? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have been taking steps to tackle climate change and thus protect our health and create good jobs in a clean economy. We are moving forward with our commitment, along with our international partners, to phase out non-efficient subsidies by 2025. We have conducted a preliminary analysis to help us respect that commitment, and that is why we have also begun consultations to hear Canadians on this matter. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South. Mr. Speaker, action is needed now. People are trying to reduce their environmental footprint, but governments in Ottawa continue to make bad choices. We are proposing a plan to reduce emissions, help families save, and create good jobs in our communities. Rather than give $12 million to a big rich company, why doesn't the government bring forward a real plan to help people create a green economy? The Honourable Minister of Fisheries. Mr. Speaker, we have a plan to tackle climate change and make our economy green and affordable with more than 50 measures and investments in renewable energy to increase our use of green electricity to help schools and companies and people save money and eliminate the use of carbon. Mr. Speaker, we continue to build a clean and more prosperous economy for our children and grandchildren.
Mr. Speaker, while Liberals cozy up to powerful lobbyists and with rich corporations, they're leaving behind Canadians struggling to make ends meet. Nowhere is this felt more by people than those who are looking for an affordable place to live and families who are looking for their first home. New Democrats have listened and proposed bold solutions to help. As a practical first step, will Liberals encourage the building of more affordable homes through targeted GST breaks for construction and help young families enter the housing market by re-establishing 30-year mortgages?
The Honourable Minister of Science and Sport.
Mr. Speaker, our government introduced and implemented Canada's first ever national housing strategy because we know that everyone deserves a safe, affordable place to call home. That's why we've invested more than $7 billion, and to date we've helped more than 1 million Canadians find a home. We recognize there's still more work to do, but we are investing in Canada's first ever national housing strategy, which will invest over $55 billion in the housing sector.
Honourable member for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Mr. Speaker, it's another day and another resignation for this Liberal government. A former three-star Army general and parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs has lost confidence in this Prime Minister and won't run again. And to help right a wrong, he plans to testify in Admiral Norman's defense against the government. What will the former parliamentary secretary to Foreign Affairs say that is so damaging to the Liberals that he had to resign to say it?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, that's absolutely ridiculous because that's not what's taking place. And when it comes to our process, we know that the process is unfolding. Mr. Speaker, this government is going to continue focusing on Canadians as the Conservatives will continue to mislead Canadians, and that's really unfortunate because that's not what we're here to do. This is the government, we are the government that lower taxes on middle-class Canadians by increasing them on the wealthiest 1% of Canadians. We are the government that introduced the tax-free Canada Child benefit, and today there's 300,000 children lifted out of poverty, over 800,000 Canadians, and the Conservatives want to take that measure away. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order. Order. The Honourable Member for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the former parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs is going to testify against the government in the case of Vice-Admiral Mark Norman. This is the latest blow to a Prime Minister who continues to hide documents in the Norman case because he's afraid of what will come to light. When will the Prime Minister do the right thing, meet his obligations, provide all requested documents unredacted to ensure that Mark Norman gets the fair trial he deserves?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Speaker, once again, I can assure the honourable member and I can assure this House and all Canadians that the Public Prosecution Service is an independent service in Canada. It is managing the prosecution of this case. Mr. Speaker, we don't interfere with such prosecutions as a government. And Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of the Attorney General is in fact fulfilling all of its obligations with respect to documents made under third-party applications.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, Friday we learned that a Liberal MP, the member for Orleans, a former Lieutenant General in the Canadian Armed Forces, was going to testify against the government in the Vice-Admiral Mark Norman trial. The Vice-Admiral was defending the Davie shipyard from political interference on the part of the Liberal government, including Scott Bryson's interference. Why is the Liberal government trying to deny a contract to Davie? The Honourable Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, as I answered several times, the trial in question is handled by the Public Prosecution Service in Canada. This is independent from my ministry and from our government. And counsel to the Attorney General of Canada are fulfilling all their obligations in terms of a third-party requests for records. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, once again, we're seeing Liberal interference and deception. After having politicized the fighter jet procurement file, they politicized the marine procurement file. If the Liberals have nothing to hide, why not provide Vice-Admiral Norman with the documents he needs for his defense? The Honourable Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, the government is fulfilling its obligations to the court and for the trial by providing the required documents throughout the process. We are fulfilling all our obligations.
Member for Selkirk Interlake Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's former parliamentary secretary has had enough. He's going to testify against these Liberals in defense of Vice-Admiral Mark Norman. Now, Canadians know the Prime Minister has abused his office to reward his friends and attack his enemies. The Prime Minister has no problem at all covering the cost of his own staff's legal fees during the whole SNC-Lavalin scandal, but refuses to do the same for the Vice-Admiral. So why is there always one set of rules for Liberals and punishment for anyone who gets in the Prime Minister's way?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, once again, I can assure this House that all rules are being followed in this case. All demands for legal assistance are being undertaken according to the rules. All requests for documents under third-party records applications are being met by my department. Mr. Speaker, this prosecution is being handled by the Prosecution Service of Canada. It is independent of my office and our government, and there has been no interference.
Honourable Member for Selkirk Interlake Eastman.
Well, I can tell you, it didn't stop the Prime Minister from talking about this and that Vice-Admiral Mark Norman was going to get charged. Now, the Liberals are obstructing subpoenas in the Vice-Admiral Norman trial, making it impossible for him to mount a proper legal defense. They're refusing to cover his legal costs, hoping to drive him into bankruptcy, and are sitting on critical documents he needs to defend himself. When will the Prime Minister turn over all the documents requested by subpoena unredacted and give Vice-Admiral Norman the fair trial he deserves?
Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, once again, quite simply, the government is meeting all of its obligations with respect to third-party obligations. The government is following all rules with respect to applications for the support of counsel.
The Honourable Member for Essex.
When the Liberals were elected, they promised to do politics differently. How things have changed. We've now learned they're using a partisan tool to fill influential positions in our country like judges and senators, just like the Conservatives appointing their friends when they were in power. Mr. Speaker, these appointments must be based on merit, not party alliance. Experienced people are being overlooked for those with big red lawn signs and even bigger checks. Why does this government care more about their wealthy supporters than the crucial requirement that our courts be independent of politics?
Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, we have set up a process for the appointment of judges which is transparent, which is merit-based, and which is rigorous, Mr. Speaker, beginning from the applications being treated by judicial committees across Canada all the way through the rest of the process. Mr. Speaker, Canadians have a right to donate to political parties. This fact neither helps nor hinders any applicant, Mr. Speaker. The applications are based solely on merit. We've appointed over 300 judges, and their quality is of the very highest caliber.
Honourable Member for Essex.
So basically, the best Liberal wins. The Liberals are so arrogant that they don't even realize the harm they're doing to the Canadian system of government. Canadians expect us to put the partisanship aside when it comes to nomination of our judges, senators, and officers of Parliament. We depend on the integrity of our institutions for a democratic and fair society. This Prime Minister promised to do politics differently. So will the Liberals commit right now to Canadians not to use their partisan database for future appointments?
The Minister of Justice.
Speaker, as I've stated, we have put together a transparent, merit-based process that is highly rigorous. Mr. Speaker, these appointments, made both by my predecessor and myself, have resulted in over 300 appointments of the very highest caliber. 55% of those appointments, Mr. Speaker, are women. They are better representing the diversity of Canada. We know we still have a ways to go, but this is an outstanding crop of appointees who have been appointed only based on merit.
The Honourable Member for Durham.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is so weak on foreign affairs that he's now allowing Chinese-run Huawei to have unprecedented control of a government-funded university research chair. The Prime Minister's weakness is now undermining academic independence and free speech. Anyone who has concerns about Huawei is being told they can't be part of this university program. No. Why is the Prime Minister allowing a state-controlled enterprise from China to dictate policies at Canadian universities?
Honourable Minister of Science and Sport.
Speaker, universities across Canada work with many partners on joint research projects across all disciplines. The freedom to pursue ideas across borders and disciplines has aroused real scientific insight and innovation. Our national security agencies work diligently to monitor security threats and have measures in place to protect Canada's systems. We will follow the advice of our public security officials and would only work with partners that have their approval.
Yes.
The honourable member for Durham.
Mr. Speaker, the minister took the Prime Minister to NSERC for his annual photo op today, but he failed to address real concerns that they're allowing China to screen out university partners based on their views towards Huawei. If Canadians express security or other concerns about risks of Huawei, they're being shut out of this university program. Why is the Prime Minister using taxpayer dollars to fund Chinese state interests at a time when China is locking up Canadians?
Honourable Minister of Science and Sport.
Speaker, as I said, we will follow the advice of our public security officials and would only work with partners that had their approval. Science and research are inherently open by nature. Our researchers work with partners across all disciplines. When universities partner with an organization, NSERC organizes a peer review process that avoid individuals who have conflicts or relationships with the applicant or partner organizations, ensuring proposals are solely on the basis of
The honourable member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The University of Stanford and Berkeley in California, as well as the University of Massachusetts and Oxford, suspended their ties and partnerships with Huawei. These universities have seen the danger in these ties, given the current Chinese policy of integrating civil and military technology development is personally overseen by the Chinese president. This means that Canadian researchers could be indirectly contributing to China's military development. The Prime Minister is trying to broaden partnerships with Huawei. Why? The Honourable Minister of Science. Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, Canadian universities work with various partnerships on research projects in all kinds of disciplines. When
universities collaborate with many partners on joint research across all disciplines. We will listen to our public security officials. We will only work with partners that they approve.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, currently Beijing is detaining 2 Canadians and 2 more are awaiting their execution. Many of our allies have banned Huawei and have warned Canada to do the same. While our Prime Minister hesitates, China is attacking our agricultural sector. Will the Prime Minister finally stand up for Canada's interests and come to a decision on Huawei? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
The Minister of Foreign Affairs is in close contact with the families of both Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, our brave Canadians. This is not grandstanding or scoring points. It's not about politics. It's about working persistently, carefully, resolutely to get them home. And we've rallied an unprecedented number of partners around the world in support of Canada's position on this and many other issues. Canada has won international support in an unprecedented way. We continue to work. We will continue to work until every Canadian is home safely.
The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Nejet-Témiscouata-les-Basques. Owners of PMEs, SMEs rather, and family farms who want to sell to their children pay more taxes than if they sell it to a foreigner. That's ridiculous. My bill in 2017 would have corrected the situation, but the Minister of Finance convinced the Liberals to vote against it by promising to take action in the next budget. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2019 was the third and last opportunity for the Minister of Finance to do so, and he refused to do so for the third time. It makes no sense to punish people who want to keep a business in the family. Mr. Speaker, why is the Minister of Finance, what does he have against these people? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Government remains committed to lowering taxes and ensuring that small businesses thrive in this country. In addition, we are making improvements through this budget to ensure that farmers and fishers have better access and, again, the ability to grow and thrive in this country. Under 10 years of failed policies under the Conservatives, we know how to grow the economy, and that's what we continue to do. And with our budget, a typical Canadian family is $2,000 better off. This is the type of economy we're growing, one that works for everybody.
Honourable member for Kootenay, Columbia.
Mr. Speaker, a landmark UN report released this morning shows that nature is in crisis. Globally, around 1 million plant and animal species are threatened with extinction, and in my riding of Kootenay, Columbia, the future of caribou is uncertain. Biodiversity loss threatens our economy, food security, health, and quality of life. The causes of species decline include habitat destruction, climate change, pollution, and invasive species. It's past time to sound the alarm. So when will this government begin the transformative change experts say we need to secure a sustainable future?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment.
Mr. Speaker, the UN report to which the honourable member refers provides a sobering assessment of the challenge facing us today. We know that since the 1970s, the world has lost about 60% of its wildlife, and that Canada is one of 5 countries representing 3/4 of the world's remaining wilderness. The fact is we have an opportunity and an obligation to do something about this emergency. Mr. Speaker, we move forward in Budget 2018 with an investment of $1.3 billion, the largest investment in nature conservation in its history. I've been to the member's province to work on the Southern Mountain Caribou file. This is one of many challenges, and it's time to sound the alarms.
The Honourable Member for Montarville. Mr. Speaker, summer is fast approaching, and people are starting to celebrate. There are a number of activities and exhibitions. Count on public participation. Budget 29 increased funding for local festivals and various events, local events. Can the Minister of Canadian Heritage tell this House how the government will be supporting festivals like the ones in my riding? The Honourable Minister. I'd like to thank my colleague. It's good to hear a good question. For the first time in more than 10 years, we're making a $40 million investment for festivals and celebrations of all sizes, for local festivals, and for 10 years, the Conservatives cut culture. And they're dreaming each and every night of doing the same. But we are going to be there to support our creators for our festivals in our regions.
The Honourable Member for Niagara West.
Mr. Speaker, China has illegally blocked Canadian canola imports. Then they suspended permits of 2 major pork producers for no reason. And how does the Prime Minister handle it? He says it's not the right time to go to the WTO. That is a weak and shameful response. When will the Prime Minister show some leadership and launch a trade action against China's illegal attacks?
The Honourable Minister of International Trade Diversification.
We continue to engage with China at the scientific level. We announced last week a generous support package for producers, which, by the way, has the support of the Premier of Saskatchewan, of the Canola Council of Canada, of producers, of trade ministers across the West, and we continue to look for other markets for canola. We have taken no possibility, no other action off the table, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Battlefords, Lloydminster.
Mr. Speaker, well, action speaks louder than words, and alone is a Band-Aid, not a solution. The Prime Minister's slow and inadequate response is costing our canola producers greatly. Our farmers are no closer to regaining market access than they were 2 months ago. To date, there is still no Canadian ambassador appointed to China, and no formal trade complaint has been launched. Instead of continuing to shell out Canadian taxpayer money to the China-controlled Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, will the Prime Minister finally stand up to China and fight for farmers?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. once again, I can tell you that we are very engaged in working as a team to solve this issue with China because we stand by our farmers, our canola producers, and our exporters. Mr. Speaker, this is a very important issue, and we shouldn't confuse supporting our farmers and our robust inspection system with supporting the poorest and the most vulnerable of this world. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, canola, pork, genetics. What's next, Mr. Speaker? More and more are calling for stronger action by the Prime Minister. And the Agriculture Committee sent to the Minister have talked about all asking for political action. Now, the Minister has said we can't get too worked up. Mr. Speaker, why is the Prime Minister refusing to take a stand for pork and canola producers in Canada? Mr. Speaker, for more than 2 months, we have been standing up for them. We have met, and it took a very long time to get a first question on canola. We are working as a team with the other departments, global affairs, with the Minister of Trade Diversification, and we are working with the representatives of producers, with our provincial counterparts. We're putting in place a strategy. We support and stand beside our canola producers. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, we were the first to stand in this House to defend canola producers. It took comments from the Leader of the Opposition for the government to do something. That's the truth. The Minister of Agriculture admitted at committee that she still hadn't spoken to the Chinese government. It's going so badly that the Chinese haven't even replied to her letter. That's the reality, Mr. Speaker. And now the Minister can meet with her counterpart in Japan. Will she talk to him, or will she avoid it because it's not a political issue? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, rest assured that I take a stand to defend our producers at all times, here and abroad. It took a long time for the member opposite to ask a first question. Mr. Speaker, I am here to look at many possibilities. This is a highly complex issue. We are working as a team with industry to defend these producers. The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Mr. Speaker, some 2,000 foreign temporary workers got a big surprise upon their arrival. Instead of getting a tax refund, they ended up with a debt following mistakes made by Revenue Canada. When 1 out of every 5 files was wrong, how can the agency say that the problem's been resolved? The President of the UPA, Marcel Groslo, is calling for action by the Minister to fix the problem so it doesn't recur ever again. When will the Minister take action? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. We are committed to ensuring that people receive the benefits and credits they are entitled to. We will continue to work with our colleagues in order to take into account the specific nature of the issue and so that they will receive the amounts owed.
For North Island, Powell River.
Mr. Speaker, during a town hall, the Minister of Seniors said that the government's new Canadian drug agency will save Canadians $3 billion per year. In what, 10 years? Without the NDPR's Universal Pharmacare Plan, private insurance and provincial plans will still be doing their own buying. The Liberals' agency will have little to no buying power to negotiate cheaper drug prices, which seniors desperately need, without buying drugs for all Canadians. Will the Minister come clean and tell seniors the truth, that this Canadian drug agency won't be saving them any money anytime soon?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Seniors.
Mr. Speaker, our government has been working hard for seniors since the day we got elected. No one should have to choose between paying for prescriptions or putting food on their table. That is why Budget 2019 establishes the Canadian Drug Agency that will work on developing a formulary, bulk buying prices for drugs, and negotiate drug prices to make prescription drugs more affordable for more Canadians. This is an important step, Mr. Speaker, towards a system where everyone can afford their prescription drugs and continue to live healthy. We will not stop when it comes to seniors.
The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lauvinière. Mr. Speaker, The Prime Minister's trip to the Aga Khan's Island has left a number of unanswered questions. The letter sent to the RCMP is critical for a comprehensive investigation to reassure all Canadians as to the integrity of their government and to reaffirm their confidence in the administration of justice. Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister agree to cooperate in the investigation process, or because Canadians want to know the truth? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister and our government have always cooperated with the commissioners. The Commissioner has done the work necessary and produced a report. The Prime Minister accepted responsibility and the recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, member for Thornhill.
Well, Mr. Speaker, much has been transpired since the Ethics Commissioner found the Liberal leader violated 4 sections of the Conflict of Interest Act in accepting an illegal vacation from a lobbyist. A federal court has now ordered the Lobbying Commissioner to reopen investigation of that lavish and illegal gift. And I've asked the RCMP Commissioner that, on the basis of original and new evidence, she consider a criminal investigation. Mr. Speaker, has the Prime Minister been contacted by either the Lobbying Commissioner or the RCMP in regards to that illegal gift?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, that member knows very well, because he spent much time actually asking questions on this file, that this matter has been thoroughly looked at by the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. We know that a report was tabled and the Prime Minister accepted responsibility as well as the recommendations, Mr. Speaker. What's clear is that the Conservatives will continue to talk about something that's already been looked at by our officers of Parliament, because they've never had regard or respect for the work that they do. But we on this side, we recognize that our institutions are intact. We know that officers of Parliament do important work, and we believe that they should be able to do that independently of this place. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Thornhill.
Well, Mr. Speaker, no one is surprised the Liberals continue to attempt to minimize and trivialize the seriousness of the Liberal leader's guilt, chronic ethical lapses, and disrespect for the law. But from the illegal vacation to his actions and reactions in the SNC-Lavalin corruption scandal and half a dozen lesser scandals in between, he's shaken Canadians' confidence in the integrity of government and the administration of justice. So again, Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister cooperate with a criminal investigation by the RCMP or the Ontario Provincial Police?
Honourable Government House Leader.
State once again that we will always respect the work of officers of Parliament and the independence of the police forces. We on this side will always cooperate with the work they do, because we recognize that Canadians deserve to have confidence in their institutions just like we do. We know that when it comes to our agents of Parliament, they do very important work, Mr. Speaker, and we will let them do that important work. But while the Conservatives will continue to rehash items that have already been addressed, we will continue to focus on Canadians and the things that matter to them in their every single day lives. And that's why we have a program and plan that's working, unlike the Conservatives that continue to mislead Canadians.
The Honourable member for West Nova.
Abandoned vessels such as the ones grounded on the beach in Sandy Cove, Nova Scotia, pose environmental, economic, and safety hazards. Similar situations are a cause for concern in coastal and inland water communities across Canada. Can the Minister explain to my constituents and all Canadians the progress made by this Liberal government to address the issue of abandoned vessels?
Good question.
Honourable Minister of Transport.
The member for West Nova for his question, as well as the Minister of Rural Economic Development and other Liberals who have advocated on this file. We as a Liberal government recognize the importance of addressing this matter before it got any worse, and that is why we came forward with Bill C-64, which is now law, and which requires vessel owners not only to operate their vessels responsibly, but to dispose of them at the end of their life. We have listened to communities that live along the coastlines, and we have implemented this bill to address their concerns.
Honourable member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister continues to defend helping China build pipelines in Asia with Canadian tax dollars while delaying building the Trans Mountain expansion in Canada. Delaying the cabinet decision will cost taxpayers billions more, and cancelling TMX would destroy confidence in Canada's ability to build major projects overall. Why is this Prime Minister more interested in helping China build infrastructure and create oil and gas jobs in Asia than in Canada for Canadians?
Minister of Natural Resources.
Speaker, the honourable member is absolutely wrong. We are building pipelines here. The Enbridge Line 3 that we gave approval to is almost complete on the Canadian side. We're the government that gave approval to Nova Gas Line that is already completed. If the members opposite were really sincere about figuring out the process on fixing the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, they would not have voted to defund and kill the process that we have put in place with a meaningful consultation with Indigenous communities to ensure that we get this project right in the right way. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Mr. Speaker, the crisis at Telefilm and the egregious layoffs of Michel Pradier, Roxane Girard, and Denis Pilon have raised concern among film producers. With all of the worries generated by the Liberals' lack of leadership with respect to web giants, we certainly don't need dangerous improvisations that are going to further weaken our industry. We're even more vulnerable than ever before. Will the Minister commit to providing emergency financial measures to stop this crisis that is affecting so many projects? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I didn't hear the question before he asked it. I spoke to a number of producers in Quebec, and the issues of TV and cinema are very important. We have always been there for them, and we will continue to be there for the industry. We will be announcing some very concrete measures in the weeks to come.
Boya Headingley.
Mr. Speaker, we are all indebted to the amazing individuals who put their lives on the line every day to keep our communities safe, in my constituency and across the country. Can the Minister responsible for Western economic diversification update this House on our government's work to celebrate emergency service workers and stimulate new business growth and economic opportunities for Winnipeg?
Yes, excellent. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for his question.
World Police and Fire Games are coming to Winnipeg in the summer of 2023. Our government will provide $2 million to support the Games and bring together world-leading emergency service experts. I want to thank all my colleagues from Winnipeg for their passion and advocacy for the Games. We all look forward to seeing Winnipeg host the events in 2023 and to welcoming firefighters and police officers from around the world.
The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, a year ago, Liberals voted in favor of our motion to hold Iran accountable for their domestic and international crimes by immediately listing the IRGC as a terrorist entity. But Liberals have failed to act. The last time I raised this issue, the Public Safety Minister claimed that a decision would be published in due course. That was 7 months ago. Does the government still intend to list the IRGC, or have they changed their position on Iran yet again?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, the criminal code listing regime is an important tool for countering terrorism and is part of the government's commitment to keep Canadians safe. The update to the listings is an important step to fight terrorism globally and ensure Canada remains a safe and peaceful country. The assessments for new terrorist entity listings are an ongoing process. New entities are listed once it has been determined that they meet the legal threshold. We will continue to take appropriate action to counter terrorist threats to Canada, our citizens, and our interests around the world.
The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, last week I asked the Minister of Justice why he was vetting judicial candidates through the Liberal database. He answered, and I quote, "We have put in place a system where judges are selected using a transparent, merit-based process." Yes, transparent, because the media reported it. As for the merit, well, it's the merit of being Liberal, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister of Justice explain how being a good Liberal is a guarantee that someone has good judgment?
La Justice.
The Honourable Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, the answer remains the same. We put in place, since we were elected, a system to select judges that is transparent and merit-based. We have made some 300 appointments since the election. These are good quality, high-quality appointments. Over 50% are women, and they represent diversity across the country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member. Mr. Speaker, before appointing judges, the government checks to see if they donated to the Liberal Party. Favoring friends, it's their go-to formula. I said last week, and I reiterate, they collected some $300,000 doing that just by appointing judges. But what counts for us in the Bloc Québécois is value, not color. How can the minister justify, seriously justify, using a liberalist database to select judges? The Honourable Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, Canadians, including lawyers, are entitled to make donations under the Canadian system. It is transparent, and they need to fulfill their obligations in the system. It's a transparent process available to all Canadians. As regards the appointments, Mr. Speaker, there are no that those donations provide no benefits or adverse situations.
Is creating more and more division in our country. The premiers of Alberta and Saskatchewan said they might call a referendum on that topic. The premier of New Brunswick agrees that the program is not helping his province to prosper. Will the government admit that it made a mistake by renewing the equalization formula without change last year, and that this unfair and inefficient program needs to be downsized and reformed?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's interesting coming from the member opposite, because he was in fact part of the government when the equalization payment formula was created. And I don't recall him speaking out then in opposition to it. However, with that being said, Mr. Speaker, we will always work with provinces and territories to find the best way to work with our counterparts. And Mr. Speaker, this is an equalization that was renewed again for 4 years, and provinces and territories will continue to be consulted as we move forward.